Somewhere on the edge of the Arabian Peninsula, under a mound of packed earth that looks like nothing more than a lump in a stony desert, archaeologists pulled back the soil and found something that should not have been there. Dozens of human skulls, carefully arranged, staring up at them from inside a stone chamber that had been sealed for nearly 7,000 years. There are no pyramids here, no golden masks, no hieroglyphics warning of a curse. And yet, when the lead archaeologist looked at what her team had uncovered, she said something that stopped everyone on site. Nothing like this had ever been found in the region, not one similar structure, not one comparable. Burial. In a landscape where graves from the Bronze Age are already considered rare, this tomb was older than the Bronze Age itself, and it was, in her own words, completely unique. The site sits near a small settlement called Nafoon in Oman's central Al-Wusta province, right where the stony desert meets the coast of the Arabian Sea. It is not an obvious place to look for ancient human history. There are no rivers nearby, no fertile valleys, nothing that immediately suggests this land once supported a community large enough to build something so deliberate and so permanent. That is part of what makes the discovery so striking. For thousands of years, this stretch of desert kept its secret buried under little more than a low, unremarkable rise in the ground, indistinguishable from the thousands of other rises scattered across the landscape. The tomb was actually spotted long before anyone dug into it. About a decade before excavations began, researchers scanning satellite imagery of the region noticed a strange symmetrical shape, half buried in the earth near Nafoon. Satellite archaeology has become one of the most powerful tools available to researchers working in remote desert environments, because from the air, the subtle differences in soil color, vegetation, and shadow can reveal the outlines of structures that are completely invisible to someone standing on the ground. What that satellite image hinted at was confirmed years later when a team from the Institute of Archaeology at the Czech Academy of Sciences in Prague began a systematic excavation of the site as part of a broader multi-year archaeological program across Oman. Leading the dig was Alžběta Danielisová, an archaeologist with the Czech Academy of Sciences, who has spent years working across Central Europe before turning her attention to the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. When her team began carefully removing the layers of sediment that had built up over the tomb, they found a structure built with real architectural intention. The walls were constructed from thin, flat stone slabs known as ashlars, carefully cut and stacked to form two circular burial chambers sitting side by side. Inside each chamber, the builders had gone a step further, dividing the space into individual compartments, almost like separate rooms within a single grave. The entire structure had originally been capped with a roof, also built from ashlars, engineered to seal the chambers from the elements above. That roof did not survive intact. Over thousands of years of seasonal monsoon rains sweeping across the Arabian coast, the stone covering gradually gave way, partially collapsing into the chambers below. In a strange twist, that very collapse may have helped preserve what was inside. A partially caved-in roof can act as a kind of natural shield, protecting the contents beneath from the worst of the erosion and disturbance that fully exposed sites often suffer. When Danielisov's team finally cleared enough of the debris to look inside, they found the remains of more than 20 individuals, an extraordinary number for a single prehistoric tomb of this age anywhere in the world, let alone in a region where structures like it simply do not appear on the archaeological record. What made the burials even more remarkable was not just how many people were buried there, but how they got there. The bones were not found as complete, articulated skeletons lying the way a body naturally falls. Instead, archaeologists uncovered what they describe as bone clusters, distinct groupings of skeletal remains that had clearly been deliberately arranged after the flesh had already decomposed. Skulls were consistent to you. I placed near the outer walls of the chambers, while the long bones, the femurs, the arms, the larger structural bones of the body were positioned pointing inward toward the center of the chamber. This is not how a body looks if it is simply laid to rest and left undisturbed. This is the result of a multi-stage funerary process. Archaeologists refer to this kind of practice as secondary burial, and it tells us something profound about how these Neolithic communities understood death. Rather than burying a person immediately after they died, the evidence suggests that bodies were first left in another location, likely exposed to the open air, allowing the soft tissue to decompose naturally over time. Only afterward were the bones collected, sorted, and carried to this stone chamber where they were deliberately arranged according to a system, skulls to the edges, long bones to the center. In a ritual that was almost certainly repeated many times over the generations, this tomb remained in use. This was not a single burial event. It was an ongoing practice, a place the community returned to again and again over what may have been centuries to complete a journey for their dead that began somewhere else entirely. Radiocarbon dating places the tomb's construction and use somewhere between 5000 and 4600 BCE, putting its origins between 6600 and 7000 years in the past. To put that in perspective, this structure predates the earliest Egyptian pyramids by well over 2,000 years. It was already ancient history by the time the first dynasties of Egypt began carving their names into stone. It existed before writing, before the wheel reached this part of the world, before bronze tools replaced stone ones across most of the region. The people who built it were living through the Neolithic period, a time when humans across parts of the world were transitioning away from purely nomadic hunting and gathering toward more settled ways of life. Though in the harsh terrain of the Arabian interior, that transition looked very different than it did in the fertile river valleys of Mesopotamia or the Nile. Just beside the main tomb, the team uncovered a second, smaller structure, built using the same techniques and containing similar bone clusters. Based on the layering of the site, archaeologists believe this smaller tomb was constructed slightly later than the first, perhaps once the original chambers had reached capacity, or perhaps as the community's burial customs evolved over time. The presence of two related structures, rather than just one, hints at a burial tradition that was maintained deliberately across generations. Not a one-time event, but an established, ongoing practice tied to a specific place in the landscape. The story of this location does not end in the Neolithic period either. Nearby, archaeologists identified 3 additional graves belonging to people from what is known as the Samud culture, a much later Arabian society that emerged thousands of years after the original tomb builders had lived and died. The presence of these later burials suggests that even after the original purpose and memory of the ancient tomb had likely been lost to time, this same patch of desert continued to hold significance as a place of burial, drawing people back to it across an almost unimaginable span of history. To understand why this discovery matters so much, it helps to understand just how little we know about this period of Arabian prehistory. As Danielisova herself pointed out, there are no known graves from the Bronze Age or earlier anywhere else in this particular region of Oman. That absence is not necessarily because ancient people avoided the area, but because the archaeological record for early Arabian history remains remarkably thin. Compared to neighboring regions like Mesopotamia, the Levant, or Egypt, all of which have been studied far more extensively for far longer. The Arabian Peninsula spent much of the 20th century relatively underexplored by archaeologists, partly due to its vast, difficult terrain, and partly because research priorities in the field of ancient history were long concentrated elsewhere. That is beginning to change, and discoveries like this tomb are a major reason why. There is also a broader climatic story hiding behind this single burial site. Today, the region around Nafoon is defined by dry, stony desert, the kind of unforgiving landscape that seems almost impossible to imagine supporting a settled community large enough to construct and maintain a monumental stone tomb over multiple generations. But during the period when this tomb was built, the environmental conditions across large parts of the Arabian Peninsula were dramatically different. Researchers studying ancient climate patterns have found evidence that during certain windows of the Holocene epoch, the period covering roughly the last 12,000 years, Arabia experienced significantly wetter conditions than it does now, sometimes referred to by scientists as Green Arabia phases. Ancient lake beds, fossilized dune systems, and long dry riverbeds found throughout the region all point to a landscape that once supported grasslands, seasonal water sources, and the kind of ecosystem capable of sustaining human communities, along with the animals they hunted and eventually herded. That context matters enormously when we think about who built this tomb and why. These were not desperate, isolated survivors clinging to the edge of an empty desert. They were, in all likelihood, part of a broader network of Neolithic communities spread across a landscape that briefly, in the grand scale of geological time, offered enough resources to support settled or semi-settled life. The tomb itself, with its careful stonework, its 2-chamber design, and its clear internal organization, is not the work of a scattered handful of people passing through. It represents sustained labor, shared belief, and communal memory, the kind of investment a community only makes in a place it intends to return to. The Czech Academy of Sciences team did not stop at this single tomb. Their work in Oman has spanned multiple field seasons and multiple regions of the country, including a parallel set of investigations far to the south, in the Rub al-Khali Desert of Dhofar province, one of the largest sand deserts on Earth. There, the same research group uncovered a stone hand axe that may date back as far as 300,000 to 1.3 million years, a tool potentially linked to some of the very first waves of early human migration out of Africa. If that dating holds up under further study, it would place this stretch of southern Arabia among the possible corridors early humans used as they first expanded beyond the African continent, long before anyone was building tombs or burying the dead according to ritual. This broader research program has also turned its attention to a very different kind of ancient structure scattered across Oman, known as triliths. These are rows of upright stones, typically less than a meter tall, dating to the Iron Age, roughly 2,000 years old, far more recent than the Nafoon tomb. Some recent news coverage compared these triliths to England's Stonehenge, largely because of their upright stone arrangement, but archaeologists studying them are quick to point out that they are a completely different kind of monument from a completely different era, built for purposes that are still being investigated. The scientists working on the tomb near Nafoon are using the same advanced dating techniques developed through a Czech Academy of Sciences Nuclear Physics Institute to more precisely place both the triliths and the ancient tomb within the timeline of Arabian prehistory. Not far to the north, in neighboring Saudi Arabia, a separate but related discovery has been reshaping how archaeologists think about early ritual life across the entire Arabian Peninsula. Since the 1970s, researchers have known about strange rectangular stone structures scattered across the desert landscape of Alula and Khaybar, structures locally referred to as Mustatils, from the Arabic word for rectangle. For decades, their purpose remained a mystery. Some early theories suggested they were simply enclosures for trapping animals, similar to the large stone hunting structures known as desert kites found throughout the region. But more recent, more careful excavations have completely overturned that idea. Archaeologists working with the Royal Commission for Alula found that these Mustatils were not built for hunting at all. Inside carefully constructed chambers at one end of these long rectangular enclosures, researchers uncovered layers of animal remains, primarily cattle horns and skulls, deliberately placed around large upright stones known as betyls, standing stone markers long associated with ritual or religious significance across the ancient Near East. The pattern was unmistakable. These were not practical structures for managing livestock. They were ritual sites, built for ceremonial offerings, most likely tied to an early form of organized religious belief centered on cattle, animals that had only recently been domesticated and introduced into the Arabian Peninsula from the Fertile Crescent at roughly the same period these structures were being built. Radiocarbon dating places the earliest Mustatils at around 7,000 years old, making them, according to the researchers who studied them, potentially the oldest large-scale ritual landscape ever identified anywhere on Earth, predating both Stonehenge and the earliest Egyptian pyramids by well over 2,000 years. Over 1,600 of these structures have now been identified across northern Saudi Arabia through a combination of satellite imagery, aerial survey, and ground excavation, ranging enormously in scale, from modest enclosures barely 20 meters long to massive constructions stretching hundreds of meters and built from many thousands of tons of stone. Taken together, the tomb near Nafoon and the Mustatils of northern Saudi Arabia paint a picture of a Neolithic Arabian peninsula that was far more organized, far more spiritually complex, and far more architecturally ambitious than historians once assumed. This was not an empty, forgotten corner of the ancient world. It was home to communities capable of large-scale, coordinated construction projects, communities with structured beliefs about death, the afterlife, and the sacred, and communities willing to invest enormous collective effort into building permanent monuments meant to outlast any single human lifetime. Back at the tomb itself, the work is far from finished. Danielisova and her colleagues have outlined a clear path forward for the human remains recovered from the chambers. The next phase of research involves detailed anthropological and biochemical analysis of the bones, including isotope analysis, a scientific technique that examines the ratios of different chemical elements preserved within human skeletal material. Because the food and water a person consumes throughout their life leaves a chemical signature in their bones and teeth, isotope analysis can reveal remarkably detailed information about an individual's diet, their general health, and even whether they spent their life in one place or moved across different environments and regions. Apply D to more than 20 individuals from the same tomb. This kind of analysis could eventually reveal whether this was a single tightly connected community, a group that included outsiders who traveled from elsewhere, or something in between. There's also an open question the team is actively trying to answer. Where did these people actually live? A tomb this substantial, used and maintained over an extended period, strongly suggests there was once a permanent or semi-permanent settlement. Somewhere nearby, a place where the builders ate, slept, raised families, and carried out the daily business of Neolithic life before eventually being carried to this chamber in death. So far, no such settlement has been definitively located, but the search continues as part of the ongoing excavation program in the region. The tomb has also drawn attention from archaeologists working elsewhere in Arabia who were not directly involved in the excavation. Melissa Kennedy, an archaeologist at the University of Western Australia who has spent years researching the Mustatils of Saudi Arabia, described the Nafoon discovery as building toward a much richer, much more complete understanding of what was actually happening across the Arabian Peninsula during the Neolithic period. Her own research into these ancient stone monuments has uncovered similar multi-person burial tombs from roughly the same era, reinforcing the idea that across a wide stretch of the peninsula, early communities were using permanent stone architecture, whether for burial or for ritual, to mark their presence on the landscape and assert some form of territorial and spiritual identity. That idea of marking territory and asserting identity through permanent architecture may be the single most important insight to come out of discoveries like this one. Long before written language, before centralized states, before anything resembling the great civilizations that would later rise along the Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates, the people living across the Arabian Peninsula were already building for permanence. They were already developing structured beliefs about what should happen to a body after death, elaborate enough to involve multiple stages, extended timelines, and precise physical arrangement of bones according to a shared cultural logic. They were already coming together as communities large enough and organized enough to quarry stone, transport it, and construct multi-chambered buildings meant to serve their dead for generations. The tomb near Nafoon will likely never produce the kind of dramatic gold and jewels that captivate headlines about ancient Egypt. There is no pharaoh here. No famous name, no elaborate wall paintings describing a journey through the afterlife. What it offers, instead, is something arguably more valuable to historians and archaeologists. A rare, direct window into how one of the least understood regions in ancient human history handled the most universal experience of all. Every civilization that has ever existed has had to answer the same fundamental question: what do we do with our dead? The builders of this tomb answered it with careful stonework, patient ritual, and a system precise enough that skulls consistently ended up at the edges, and long bones consistently pointed toward the center. A pattern too deliberate to be accidental, and too old to have left behind a single written explanation. As excavation and analysis continue in the years ahead, this small stone tomb on the edge of the Yamani Desert stands as a reminder of just how much of human history still lies buried beneath our feet, waiting for the right satellite image, the right research team, and the right decade of careful digging to finally bring it back into the light. If you enjoyed uncovering this piece of forgotten history with us, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next lost tomb, ancient mystery, or archaeological breakthrough we cover. Drop a comment below and let us know which ancient discovery you want us to dig into next, and give this video a like if you want to see more deep dives like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.